And since there's two of us, I can actually have the chat open as well to see if I see something to
Perfect.
comment on.
Great. And we want to welcome everyone to the 24th Annual Capital Conference Virtual Edition. It is our goal that each session is about an hour in length. However, we may go a little longer or we may go shorter. My name is David Stevens. I am the Director of Academic Activities for UIL. Also helping with this session is Glenda Munoz, Administrative Assistant for UIL Academics, which many of you hear from all the time. This session is preparing the essay portion of the CIE and Social Studies contests. Our presenters are Andy Bates, the Social Studies State Contest Director, and Bradley Wilson, the Current Issues and Events State Contest Director. Andy and Bradley, thank you both for being willing to share your wisdom and knowledge with our attendees in this new format of Capital Conference.
You're more than welcome, and I apologize in advance for any technology problems. I'm working on a different machine than normal, and I think most of us have gotten used to tons and tons of Zoom conferences. So this one's going to be a little bit different because with two presenters and just a little bit of lag in between here and Sabine Pass, it could be kind of fun, maybe more so than normal.
What he's saying is he has limited amounts of wisdom and knowledge to share. So I'm going to be doing double duty. So.
Half as much, right? I only go 0 to 10.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just takes you twice as long to get there. All right, so
quality, not quantity.
This session started maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I think, when David and Andy and I were having some conversation about the essay and repeated problems that we'd seen with the essay in both of our contests. And our team not only solved some problems from the student's perspective, but from the grader's perspective. So the people grading the essay, we saw some challenges with that, and we wanted to sort of address those. So over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been doing this session to address sort of both topics. And this is where my problem with technology comes, because I can only see 2/3 of the screen. But the bullet point here, one thing to keep in mind, and we'll emphasize this over and over and over again, is that the essay is important. It acts in bullet point form. It acts as the determining factor in deciding the best of the best. We go through the multiple guess part for sure in both of our tests, but then inevitably there'll be a bunch of ties. There'll be, this person will miss this question and that person will miss that question, and how do you determine whether that's equal or not? So we brought in the essay to really give a open-ended determining factor that allowed us to get some breadth in the contest as well as depth. And Andy, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and I mentioned this in my social studies specific deliveries. And the essay, I know the thing that obviously people don't love about it is it has a subjective nature. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is how subjective the multiple choice questions can be as well. They aren't completely objective just because they have one for sure right answer. Where we get them, how we frame them, and just the fact that you can guess and get it right without knowing anything is in itself subjective. Whereas the essay, you can't guess at the essay. You have to know a deeper level of facts and understanding and have analysis to really do well. And that's honestly the highest level of competition that we're searching for in education, that we're searching for with these contests, is to see, do you really comprehend these subjects? Not just can you guess or can you eliminate, or are you just showing test taking skills, but do you comprehend the current issues and events, or do you comprehend this aspect of social studies that we're focusing on this year? And the essay does that.
So like Andy just said, it allows them to demonstrate their extensive knowledge of the topic, allows them to go beyond just what is that piece of the multiple choice question that we've chosen to put in, right? And like Andy said, we choose to put some multiple choice questions in lieu of others. Every year I throw away just as many questions as I have on all the tests. And that is, in the heart of it, very subjective. And we pull in the essay, really just a reminder to give you the breadth and the depth. So when you're working with your students on this, challenge them not to just answer the question, but answer it in depth, right? And we're going to talk a lot about that and how to grade that test. And then, of course, as a college professor and as a school administrators, a lot of us know the problems that we have with students and learning writing skills. So this is another opportunity for us, UIL, and teachers across the state to teach and incorporate writing into our curriculum, which of course any job that they get after college is going to involve writing of some level or another. So just look at what the data is telling. You know, as a PhD type, I'm always looking at the data. What is the data telling us, right? And that last bullet point, data shows that strong writing skills make candidates more favorable. And I see that with my students all the time. I had a student just recently that was turned down for a job because writing skills weren't up to where the prospective employer thought they should be. And we're seeing more and more prospective employers give writing tests as part of the interview process. So it's not something we should just go, ooh, this is a UIL contest and blow it off. No, we're actually trying to give real skills, real world skills that students can apply beyond high school. Here's another one from CNBC a couple of years ago, why Johnny can't write and why employers are mad. And I do like the lead on this article. Can you tell a pronoun from a participle? Use commas correctly in long sentences. Describe the difference between its and its. And if you were watching the news this morning on ABC, you know that that's a problem even with professionals on that front. So here's a quote from Cynthia Linville at Sacramento State University. Recruiters and companies are saying, send us a writing sample, and if you don't meet our standards for communication, we are not hiring you. College students often don't realize how important on-the-job writing is. And that's a challenge with my students, even though I teach in a mass communication program and writing is a significant part of our curriculum. I work with a lot of engineering students and science students and don't emphasize writing. And so I constantly come back to them and say, I don't care what your job is going to involve writing. Andy?
100%. And again, with all these things, not only do we feel like UIL academics should be preparing students, it should be pushing students. And so that's what we're trying to do with our contests in general and with the essay portion specifically. I remember in college, I had a professor who asked everyone, would you rather an essay or a multiple choice? And of course, everyone raised their hand for essay because you could get partial credit. But I wanted multiple choice because I was lazy. I just wanted to answer questions and not have to write something. But we don't want the lazy solution. We want to push people. I mean, that's the whole purpose, is this, striving for excellence and striving to do things that aren't necessarily obvious or easy. And the essay not only better prepares you, but it pushes you.
Which is true for all the UIL contests, right?
Yes.
Push them. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the process. Now, let me back up maybe 5 years to when we were sort of conceiving of this session. And one of the very first things that we did was we went to the students at State that year. I think it was 2013 or something like that. Went to the students at State and asked them a bunch of questions about how the process that they used for writing the essay and what they thought they could do different. Remember, these were students that made it to State, right? So this data is coming from them, not so much from us, right? And their first piece of advice was read the essay prompt. Now, Andy and I are going to say this about 1,000 times, that you would be shocked at how many people answer the essay that they want to answer, not the essay that we asked the question about. So read the essay prompt, right? That's step number one. And then we ask the students, what do you do after that? And my screen goes blank. There we
go. Which is what Bradley just did, which is freak out.
Right.
Because when those things happen that are unexpected, which you don't know what the prompt is, so it's unexpected, you freak out. It's a very natural human reaction. And the best thing to do is expect it and then deal with it. Not to let it control you, but to say, you know what, this is what I do. This is what is going to happen. I'm going to have a little bit of an adrenaline spike when I first read that essay. Might as well get it out of the way. So do it first.
And by first, we mean first, right? You get the test, you open the test, right? Because the next thing you're going to do is take the test, right? You get the essay, we hand it out to you. It says you can't open it. So you sit there and wait for us to pass out the test. Then we say, go. Open to the essay portion first, right? Read the essay, because then that little adrenaline push that Andy and I talked about, you read it and you go, oh man, I don't know anything about that. Well, yeah, you do. Of course you do, right? Because we're not going to ask you.
Make sure you go all the way to it and read it specifically, because on Bradley's test, he's going to have a picture on the cover. that alludes to the prompt, but it doesn't spell it out specifically. So you may have a general idea, but you need to know the specifics, because we take a long time to craft these essays. I know I go back and forth on the particular wording. I may know the overall topic, which like his picture will show you, but the actual specific aspects of what I want in an essay, those take a lot of time. And so you've got to read it first. You're going to have to read it very, like we said, numerous times, but you're going to have to also read it very closely. So do that first. Don't just, okay, it's about this and take the test. Go to it, find out what exactly it's about, and then take your test.
Then read the essay prompt again. Do you see the pattern in what we're trying to emphasize here? Read the prompt, freak out, get that adrenaline rush, take the test. You might find some clues in the test about the essay, or it might remind you of some things. Then read the prompt again. Maybe highlight, maybe underline some key points, right? Write an outline. And my students, when they get into my classes, are often very bad at this, even though their high school English teachers have told them, write an outline. They're just, it's not part of their nomenclature. And so we really push them, even if it's just 4 or 5 words, right? Just a back of the napkin outline, right? Write a little outline. Then compare your outline to the prompt that we've given you, right? Does your outline match what we've asked you to do? And we're going to emphasize this quite a bit as we look at some sample prompts that we've used.
And that outline, remember it, and the good doctor basically said this, but to emphasize it, it doesn't have to be specifically structured like you've been taught about an outline. It doesn't have to have a million different subpoints. I always go back to extemp, and having those 3 main points. At least have that, have that basic idea. And then the other thing super important, which Dr. Wilson said, is make sure you read the prompt again to make sure that the outline you created actually lines up with everything and includes everything that was in that prompt.
Then write a draft, right? The draft should not be the final version of your essay. Right? Write the draft, and here's where my technology is. See, they're having there. Then read the prompt again, right? Make sure that your essay matches the prompt that we've given you. And this is where I tell students all the time, write A, B, C, D in the prompt. These are the 4 things that we need to address. Then go back in your paper and write A, B, C, D in your paper. Do those things match up? Then spend, and I tell students, allow 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes to edit and rewrite, right? Look for write-os. Just look for little things that might mess things up, right? It's okay to spend some time editing and rewriting, and I think that's an important part of the writing process. All right, so then we ask the students to give us some advice, right? And here's one of the pieces of advice that the students gave. Neatness counts. If the judges can't read your essay, they will naturally have a hard time rewarding it. Andy?
Yeah, this is all about communication. It goes back to the editing, which was that last step that we talked about. You are trying to have a conversation in written form with these judges. And so you want to be as clear as possible. If there's noise in the room, it's hard to understand what someone's saying to you. If they keep looking away, it's hard to stay focused on their point. And it's the same thing with writing. The more you can do to be clear and maintain that clarity throughout an essay, the better your effect, or the more increased effect you're going to have on those judges. And part of that is just is legibility. If you can't read it, then your message is getting garbled. The judge has to naturally expend more energy trying to read what you put down, and people have a finite amount of energy to expend. And so if they read another essay that maybe isn't as well analyzed, doesn't have as many facts, but they don't have to expend that energy because they can read it very clearly, it's going to naturally appeal to them more just because your message didn't come across.
And of course, the last time we had state, I watched a judge really, really struggle with an essay that ended up being one of the award-winning essays, but they spent a lot of time just because of that person's handwriting. So, work with your students on printing, if that's the case, or, writing in cursive very neatly, because it does matter. And if something's confusing, cross it off and rewrite it neatly. They don't have to
And
scribble it off.
and that's an important point that I want to put out there, is that that's what a judge should do. And we want to support that. And we want to emphasize that judges should put in the effort. But at the same time, we can't control everyone's actions. So we're giving you what to do to help yourself just overall. But I definitely think we need to put it out there that you've got to put some work in as a judge and try to, like, if I see someone's written in cuneiform, I'm going to try and figure it out. I wish they wouldn't, but I'm going to try, and I think everyone needs to put that effort in so that the analysis and the knowledge is what counts. 99% of that score you put on the page reflects the analysis and information. However, to make that easier on a judge, you really do need to impress upon your students that they need to write as neatly as possible.
So a couple tips that the students gave about neatness and what we mean by neatness specifically. Double space, even though they're handwriting stuff, especially people that have big loops in their writing, double space. Keep the editing simple. They don't need to go through and scribble giant black marks on everything that they're editing. Just one simple line through it and then rewrite above it is just fine. Spend the last few minutes proofing for grammar, spelling, and punctuation. Even though I know that if I gave you on a test the difference between ITS and IT''S, I know everybody would pass, or there, and there. But it's so easy when you're concentrating on the content to forget about some of the little things. So go back at the end and reread it for some of the little things, because those little things, like Andy said, can get in the way of the bigger picture often. And then something that can cause even bigger problems, have the student put their number at the top of every page, not their name, not their school on any of the material. The directions clearly say that, but in school, we teach our students put your name at the top of every page. So some of them just get into that habit, and we've got to make sure that they're broken of that habit for UIL. Put the number at the top of every page.
But they're substituting it with putting that number, because I know you all have had near misses or horror stories, and I've seen them in real time where everything's graded and then there's a random essay that shows up, or there's a test that has an objective score but it's missing the essay, and you don't know where an essay goes or you don't know where a paper goes because the number's not there. So I try to push that as much as possible. Put that number on everything in front of you. The copy of the test, even though like at state you're going to keep that test, I don't care. Write your number on it. Your answer document, every single piece of paper you're going to use for that essay, even your scratch paper if you need to, just so that 100% you've got your number down. And of course, hopefully it's the correct number, which is also an issue, but verify that I would push your students to verify their number when they turn it in. Don't just walk out. I mean, I know at state, we make sure we check the roster. So when they turn that paper in, it has the right name or the right number that correlates with the name on the roster. But I would say as coaches and sponsors that you push your students to make sure they have put the right number on their papers when they turn them in.
And it's okay for the student to ask, when they hand in their paper, can I verify my number, right? That's a legitimate question to ask. All right, so let's spend a little bit of time talking about what makes a good essay, right? And the first thing that you'll see is we go back to reading the prompt. Well, a good essay answers the questions that we asked in the prompt. You would probably be a little bit surprised at how many essays we read, even at state, that don't answer the question that we asked. And that is really, really critical. And then all the things that we teach in class. It begins with a well-formatted thesis, right? It answers the questions that we're asking. And here it is in summary form. Here's a thesis about what my paper is going to be. It's a clear and precise statement that brings it all together, sort of in a nutshell. And then the paper continues in a logical order. You may have the best beginning or lead on your story in journalism terms, but then it just falls apart after that, or it rambles, or it talks about this for a little while and that for a little while, and then it comes back to this and then goes back to that, right? So it can't just be the beginning, but also just like Andy was talking about neatness, I also can't overemphasize the importance of having a good beginning, because just human nature, if the beginning of the paper is weak, or if it starts rambling right at the beginning, even though the rest of the paper may be awesome, it's just human nature to put that one down in their mind one little notch, right?
Yeah,
And then it
you've got
flows.
to suck people in, and with this whole thing, I go back to a speech format with extemp. You've got to have a good introduction. You've got to get people in there, not just to get them committed, but to explain what you're going to talk about. And so that ties into what we spoke about with the outline and making sure you know. And then, of course, that ties back to answering the prompt and making sure you're addressing everything. All of that is tied into creating a thesis and an intro that is going to make sure that the rest of your essay has everything that it needs.
And I know, especially if you're one of the ones grading, everybody's in a hurry, everybody wants to get on the bus and go home. But these essays are really important, and we spend time with them. But that mindset gets in there. Ooh, we need to be done. We need to be done. We need to be done. And so that beginning of that essay really does matter, especially when they lay them all out and they start comparing essays. That beginning really matters. So emphasize that with your students there. And although you'll see that we kind of don't spend a lot of time on that, because they are the little things, right? The big things are the big things. That's the thesis, the organization, the flow, and the little things are in there. Spelling errors are a problem, but I think all of us, when we're grading our essays, are a little bit more willing to forgive that than we would be a paper that's rambling. So
yeah, and you can forgive a lot of things, but going back to the importance of the thesis, it's hard to forgive that because it's in the rubric. That if the thesis is not there and if it's not well organized, that it sets a hard cap on the points that can be awarded. And some people, some judges are going to take that more to heart than others. But again, it's there for a reason. You've got to have it. And so the start of the essay, and maybe that's a point of emphasis that you need to do with your teams, is practice. Just here are several different essay prompts. Let's just write an intro to each one, not a full essay, but an intro, because that establishes everything, not just for the eventual points, but like I said, for the judges. They're human. You want to get them involved. I watched the first episode of Game of Thrones. Didn't get me, so I never watched any more. But first episode of Walking Dead, I was there. And 4 seasons later, I bailed because it got really slow. But still, that first episode hooked me. And it's the same thing with anything else. You want to bring them in and say, look, this is what I'm going to do. This is the information I have. And then continue it logically throughout the rest of your essay.
And that at the beginning of that essay doesn't start off with something like, I really think that the COVID virus needs to go away. The COVID virus is bad. I don't like the COVID virus, right? And I tell my students this all the time. Love you to death. I think you're amazing students. I don't care about your opinion. What I want is the facts. And especially in our essays, we want the facts related to your topics, right? And so here's a tip that came from one of the students at State that year. The essay may analyze and interpret. It should not attempt to editorialize. The very nature of expository writing requires the writer to enhance the reader's understanding of a subject by analyzing its parts and interpreting its meaning, right? You're analyzing and interpreting. You're not editorializing. That's something we really all need to emphasize with our students a lot, because we do see it pop up in the essays, even at State, from year to year.
That's part of the prompt. I mean, it says that, and so it's there for a reason, because it's that important. And I think it tends to happen a little bit more in current events, because obviously you're formatting opinions as you see those things, whereas historical ones you kind of given opinions sometimes. But it holds true for both. You're going to have your opinion come through based on the information you present and based on the topics you discuss and how much time or writing you give to them in your essay. So opinion's going to come through regardless, and that's okay, but that's the only way that it needs to come through. It doesn't need to be these editorialized opinions that I tend to see a lot, and especially with current events, but I see them in social studies as well.
And just like Andy talked about earlier, how through the very nature of answering the question, what you put first, what you put last, their opinions are going to come through. We just don't need them to state it. We need them to focus on the facts. Then we talked about what a good essay has in flow and in order. So one of the students said, here's my tip. My tip is to work on the transitional or directional words. The essay should have a clear, organized, logical order. And information should flow from one idea to the next. Sorry about that.
It was me. I was calling you just to throw you off.
Yeah, no, I don't know why I didn't think to move the phone away. So think about the transitional words. And we have that transitional list of words out there. You can go to the web and just look for transitional words, however, whatever those transitional words might be, and use them in your essay.
And this goes right back to speech again. You know, it's more compelling to listen to someone who guides you as they go. And it's the same thing with writing. I want to know where I'm going next. I don't want to jump around, and we've talked about the logical order, but one way to easily guide people from one idea to the next is with these transitions. And again, you can get a list of words very easily to use, but also you want to put them in context. You just don't want to use first, next, last, although that's a start. You want to try to connect the ideas together, not just, and my next point is, and my next point is, but you can say, now that we've discussed this, we can see how it transitions into needing to analyze this, you know, but those really do help. And those are going to separate, having that versus not having that is going to separate the top essay from the top of the top essay. You know, you've got the information, you've got the analysis, you got to find a way to put these two papers apart, one over the other. It's going to come down to the little things like neatness, like just a better organization or transitions, because at the end of the day, there has to be, excuse me, there has to be something to separate one from the other.
And then this tip that's come up over and over again, and you see us repeating it, make sure to have a thesis and to answer the question, no matter how much you wish it was about something else. Again, we spend a lot of time talking about writing these questions, so we want the students to answer the question that we're asking. And another tip, examine the question in a variety of contexts, and we're going to see this in the prompt again. Social, political, scientific, cultural, and economic, for example. And Andy has a neat little acronym for remembering that.
Yeah, it's just specs. You know, when you're designing something, when you're planning something out, you need specifications. And so if you can remember that, then it's the same thing. Social, the S, political, the P, economics, the E, cultural's the C, and then scientific is the S. So plan those specs out, and you may even have your students write that down, right? Specs, you know, S, what is the social aspect that I'm going to speak about? Political, what is the political context of this particular essay topic? And write that as their outline, or at least part of their outline, and that way you know you're covered. Scientific doesn't apply as much to the social studies, and it doesn't always apply to the current events, but it can, and that's why I put that as the second S. But those first four are always going to be there. Every topic is going to have them. So if you use that as your outline, then I think you're ahead of the game in a lot of ways. So
just a couple of quick things about the test. Nothing you haven't heard before, I hope. The current and season events is very efficient. We try to manage our time wisely, so we don't need lots of extraneous questions. We just cover the year in 40 questions, right? And then again, in the name of efficiency, and trying to be succinct, we have a 10-point essay, right? There it is. That's the test, right? And you've got 60 minutes to do it. We don't need tons of time to get out there and ramble and ramble and ramble. We just 60 minutes, and here's the test, right? And then the top score for the individual is the objective plus the essay. And then team scores don't use the essay. Social studies.
It's always fun to hear people justify their weaknesses. But so there's, you know, with current events, obviously it's you know, half as difficult as social studies, so you don't need as much time. And of course, only 40 points because, you know, we're twice as good. So you get 80 points for having answered the questions in social studies. The essay, you need to be twice as smart to really nail that essay. So it's 20 points rather than 10, which of course gives you your perfect 100, which, you know, that's the gold standard, such as is the social studies contest.
So same stuff that we've covered over and over again, all right? So a reminder, the individual score is the objective plus the essay. So that alone also ought to tell you that there's some importance that we assign to the value of the essay. And we only look at the top 8. So, and this was done just in the name of efficiency. Instead of having to grade every essay, I can't even imagine having to grade every essay in district, region, or state. We only look at the top 8. And that takes long enough. You know, we invest a significant amount of time just in grading those 8, right? So let's talk about the importance of this essay, right? So here we have a set of individuals, and this is their score, and we look at who's going to advance to the essay round. So we just are going to take the top 8, and it's just that simple. So if you've never done this before, you grade the objective portion of the test, you put them in order, and the top 8 get graded on the essay portion. Andy, you want to talk about ties?
Yeah, so obviously there's going to be ties, hence the need for a tiebreaker, which is essentially what the essay is. Obviously, it serves a lot of different purposes, which we've talked about, but one of the most important is the fact that you're gonna have ties if you have just an objective section. So based on that, once you add an essay in there, you're gonna break a lot of those ties. However, there still may be some remaining. And so if after you add the objective and the essay score together, there's a tie, that's where we go back to what I mentioned before. You just hold them side by side and you decide which one is better. It doesn't change the points. It's just which one is better, and that wins the tie. And of course, that's where it comes down to those fine details, the, you know, just working.
You're jumping ahead. You're jumping ahead. We're not there yet. I was specifically thinking about if there are ties, you may be grading more than 8 essays. So,
well, you know, you got to let me know
you
what
can't read my mind. This is the problem with not being in the same room. I know. Right? If we were in the same room, we could read each other's mind. Not last year at state, obviously, because we didn't have state last year, but the year before last at state, in one of the classifications, I think we ended up grading 15 essays because of ties. So just realize that you may be grading more than 8 essays on that front. Right. Now we get to talk about what Andy wanted to talk about, and that's this form of the tie, right? So here's our top 8, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, top 8. And then I always ask people, okay, who plays first? And everybody has no problem choosing who plays first. And if we were in person, we would go, oh, Tara plays first, right? So Tara plays first. And then the question comes, who plays second? And everybody does a quick look at it and they go, oh, Brittany, no, oh. But Andy, you want to talk about why Juan is the actual second placer?
Well, and it's very close to why Tara would be first, even though her objective score was, you know, significantly lower when you look at it percentage-wise than Brittany on the objective portion. Because of that essay, she was able to jump way ahead. And the same thing now we have with Juan, adding an extra component to why it's important is that even though his objective was lower, his total was the same. And then we look at his essay score, it was higher, he wins the tiebreaker.
So we do this as a little theoretical discussion every year. And then in state in 2019, it moved from being theoretical to being very practical. So just to give you, some of you, you can download this presentation on the website later, but if you like to compare how your students are doing to others, it's always nice to have the numbers. All right, so here was the objective score average at state at 2019 was a 25.2, which is pretty much in line with the other ones, although a little bit lower than the other years. So that gives you some gauge. The high was a 33 and the low was a 13. And then at the bottom, you have the essay average. So, and I can just get those numbers and compute that average, 5.7, 6.3, 5.2. So you can see that our essays are pretty much holding the same the same old, right? But here's how the numbers actually played out in state of 2019. So, and this is current issues and events because I don't have the numbers for social studies. In class 1A, the average was 4.5 with a 6.5 high and a 1 low. In 2A, we had an average of 5.45 with a high of 8, which pretty much played out the high score all the way down, right? So the low scores are pretty much in par with one another, and the high scores are, or the averages are pretty much in par with one another. Sorry, you can hear my dog who is now woken up, and yeah, I don't know why my mom won't let him outside, but you know, that's the way life goes. So
well, and I think when you look at these numbers, they tend to hold up over conferences. Obviously, you see the one that's generally an outlier, especially at state. You're not going to see things that low, but every now and then they come there. Whereas everything else is between a 3 to a 4.5, or basically a 3 to 4 is your low end, and so those stack up, generally speaking, throughout the conferences, and then an 8 to a 9 being your high. So even though there is a bit of a range there, I think generally you see some uniformity.
So one of the patterns that I've kind of hypothesized over the years, and it's holding up actually, is that the score, it's harder to get a higher score at the higher classifications. So I said that backwards. It's harder to score high. Yes, I said it right. The higher classifications are going to have higher scores. And I kind of view it as survival of the fittest. You just are competing against so many more people in classes 6A and 5A to get to state that you have to be better. And that's kind of my hypothesis. And if you look at the numbers over the years, the average scores tend to be significantly, but it's not that much, but it is statistically significant, lower at the lower classifications than the higher classifications. So that's just a right? That's just a we take a note of it and we compare. But let's look at class 6A, all right? This is 2019, and we're just gonna look at class 6A. I've removed the names for obvious reasons. 4 people tied for first place based on the objective score of 31, and we'll just call them alpha, beta, delta, and gamma. Alpha was a CINE student. She got a 7 on the essay and remained in first place. However, beta, delta, and gamma didn't do as well on the essay, scoring a 6, a 5, and a 4.5 respectively. And remember, these are real numbers. This is not something that we just did to make the point, right? This is actually what happened at state in 2019 in class 6A, right? So look at what we got here, right? Whoops, did I go backwards? It went backwards again, didn't it?
You did.
Right, so look at what we got. And I go on down to the list, right? There's the objective scores in the second column, and then the first places, of which there was a 4-way tie for first place. At state, in class 6A, there was a 4-way tie for first place, right? So when we say the essay matters, here's exactly what we're talking about. These are real numbers. These are tied to real people in our competition. So we looked at the objective scores, and then we've got to go to the essay, right?
And I think it's important, if you look all the way down at theta there, it justifies why we think you should focus on the essay and go over the essay with your students, and not just what it could be, but how to write it and how to approach these possible topics that you discuss. Because you have someone who barely made it into those top 8.
The cut.
You know, they may have had to guess on a question just to make it in that top 8. But once they got there, because of the essay and because of their ability to analyze and to format that essay, they took full advantage, getting a tie for the highest score on the essay, and therefore placing at state in 6A. You know,
and not only
a
Zeta,
state.
look at Zeta, right? Zeta went from, what was it, 6th place to 2nd.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Because of the essay score, right? And again, these are real numbers with real people tied to real students. So, you know, especially, I think Andy's right. I think Zeta and Theta illustrate our points very clearly, right? The essay really does matter, and it's something you should spend time on in the classroom, not just as a theoretical exercise, but as a practical exercise. It really does matter, right? And then I remind you, in both of our contests, contestants who fail to submit an essay shall be disqualified. And Andy loves to talk about this portion of it.
Yeah, I do. It's what I think about at night. So anyway, basically, this is a little bit of a gray area. What is a legitimate essay? Because it has to be, according to the wording, it has to be, a sincere attempt. And to me, sincere attempt is just, it somehow relates to the prompt. We're not looking to disqualify people. But if you write something that has nothing to do with the prompt, you just talk about how annoying it is for someone to, have a dog that barks during a presentation, and that has nothing to do with the essay. And so that should be disqualified. But you got to know that. You got to tell the people that. So because of that, we like to make sure that everyone knows that going in. We don't want people to be disqualified. If they got up on the Saturday or they did the work to show up, obviously we want to reward them for what they know, but the essay is part of it, and it's a big part of it, and so it has to be a sincere attempt.
And then we wanted to spend just a couple minutes talking about how we choose the topic. Because I will tell you right up front, I'll start because mine's a little bit shorter than Andy's is. Obviously, mine's got to be tied to current issues and events, and it's got to be something that's really been pervasive throughout the entire academic year. It's very unlikely it's going to be something that just happened right before district, region, state, or the invitational meets. It's going to be something that's an ongoing thing. So not that you got to compete in it, but at region and state this year, I did something I'd never done before, because what was going on during region and state this year? Well, it was the pandemic. So both of my essays for region and state had to do with COVID-19 and the pandemic. That has not ever happened before, and highly unlikely to happen again. But when I looked at what was going on in the world, that was what was going on in the world in a big way. So it became, okay, how can I not write about the pandemic? These days, there's so many big things out there. It's pretty easy to pick what the essay topics are going to be if we were written right now. But in the fall and next spring, who knows? Right? So just look at what's going on, and it's been going on all year long. That's what I would say about the essay for current issues and events. It's a little bit different with social studies.
Yeah, and I think, just touching on what you were talking about, even though you have two topics on the same event, there's so many developments that you would have been
Correct.
very easily able to talk about different aspects without repeating anything from one to the other. And that's what I do. I don't want to repeat things with my essays. I like to ask about different areas of the topic so that you're having to show all the tools in your toolkit, so to speak. They will inevitably have some overlap, some parts of the topic. Sorry, I had something in my throat there. But some parts of the topic will overlap, but not much. And that's what I try to look for. Last year, obviously, it was a little easier to try and spread everything out. I included in my last presentation, or I think the one for beginners actually, what my prompt for region was going to be. And it was about Japan. It was about the Meiji restoration, but then it was specifically about foreign policy. So that's the other aspect of what I do when I look for my topics is not only do I try to find something fresh or different, but I try to make it specific from that general topic. I try to find something that narrows it down so that you have enough time to write about it and you're not just throwing out tons of facts because it's just about Japan or just about the Meiji restoration. Because, I mean, literally there are several books written on that topic. So I'm going to try and get more specific. I'm not going to just talk about Teddy Roosevelt. I will talk about a specific aspect of either his foreign policy, his life, his time in Cuba, things like that. So that's what I look at, is try to cover fresh areas and try to be specific about them.
So Andy, in your, I've always been curious about this. In your essay questions, starting at invitational, do they start off broader at invitational and go more specific towards state? Is there any pattern to that? Or is it just?
And I mentioned this a little bit. I purposely try to make them more difficult by the time I go to state, which is on the objective questions. I try to keep those even. So in some ways it can be more specific, but really, I think it just picks a topic that isn't as well known. I don't try to get as specific, but I do try to like pick an area that is that people are less aware of. You know, like I may start with Mao and then move over to Deng, you know. So I
Cool.
could start with let's say Teddy Roosevelt, although again, if I did get specific, like you're talking about, I could move him all the way to state. But just in general, I'd start with, you know, Roosevelt and move all the way over to say someone like William Walker.
And I know we've only got about 12 minutes left, so we'll keep plugging through things.
But we did add that in there for some of you. I know a lot of you come to this session a lot, and you know, a lot of it is us talking about the same thing. So we wanted to throw that aspect in there to freshen it up and give you some more information as well.
It's a challenge picking the topic for the essay. I think for both of us, it's a challenge.
It is,
just a reminder
although
here,
I will tell people just really quickly, like if you go back to these presentations that I do in my PowerPoints, I look at those when I'm trying to pick an essay. Everything I told you about, this is what I think about for an essay. These are some of the big topics you should look at. It's because those are the ones I'm going to look at as well. So there's a high probability, although it's not 100%, that if it's in those presentations listed under essay topics, it could show up.
So a reminder that if students who don't write an essay are going to be disqualified, and it must be a sincere attempt, and it's based on how well the topic has been addressed, right? So we give you, or UIL gives you, a rubric to look at, and it's actually almost exactly the same rubric from the social studies to the current issues and events.
Yeah, the only difference I think is mine doesn't say scientific, and it's the points are double. That's it.
Right. So we look at it, and it's pretty straightforward. An essay opens with a declarative statement that extends the prompt without restating it. The thesis is supported by substantial relevant information that it analyzes the prompt from a range of perspectives: political, social, cultural, and economic. Right, and like Andy said, it eliminates one of them. It is not a mere shopping list of facts. It interprets the facts without editorializing, the same points that we've made already. The essay is well written and organized with few spelling, grammar, or punctuation errors. And the essay is clear, precise, and succinct. Right?
So this is where you're talking about the top of the top, right? Like what is a perfect essay? Like what are you going for? And again, when there's a tie, when they're side by side, what's going to break that tie in your favor? It's going to be the difference between chock-a block full of facts and actually analyzing those facts and telling you why they're important and why they relate to the prompt. Having a bunch of ideas and actually putting those ideas into a logical order. You know, having a great essay or having one that is also mainly free of obvious errors and, you know, is easier to read. Those are going to be the ones that are bumping up on 20.
So in our last 10 minutes here, we want to talk just a little bit about actually grading the essay, something that you can practice in your classroom, or you can practice with your teams, or certainly that you're going to be seeing at invitational meets, district, region, and at state. And the first thing that we want to emphasize is something that Andy and I have been pushing for a long time. In a 3-person judging panel, must every judge grade the essay? Yes. Right, and we're going to emphasize this over and over and over. Anytime you see us, if we're judging with you in any contest, we want all of the judges to see all 8 essays independent of one another before you start comparing any results, right? So Judge A is going to look at it and give it a number without talking to Judge B. Judge B is going to look at it and give it a number without talking to Judge C. And Judge C is going to look at it and give it a number without talking to A or B. Right? And we feel that that's really important part of grading the essay. We know it takes a little bit more time, but quite frankly, my experience has been only a little more time does it take to do it this way than it does it take to do any other way.
And that excludes having the essay read as well. That means
Right.
each person reads it, not it being read aloud, which first off, like, I hate having people read to me, but when they do, they're going to include emphasis, and they're going to, without even trying, put some sort of spin on how it's said, and that's going to affect a grader. So we don't want that.
So remember, you've got the rubric, right? And it gives you the points. This is the current events one as opposed to the social studies, but they're the same, except for that kind of that one word difference, right? And here's a sample prompt, right? And I'm going to do what Andy doesn't like. I'm going to read to you real quick. The United States economy, the world's third largest economy, is strong. The gross domestic product is growing at about 2.6% per year. Unemployment was only 3.8% in February. Inflation only 2.2%. While the national debt is about 22 trillion, I can't read that number, some percent of GDP, most economists say that it is only unhealthy for short periods. Not all other countries have economies that are that healthy. Pick 3 other countries, not the United States, and discuss economic problems they've been having so far this academic year and the socio-political situations around them. So if it were me and my students, we would go back through and read that first paragraph, and we would kind of just file that information. And then I would have them write down, pick 3 other countries, right? Because there's the focal point of it, right? And then in their outline, what are my 3 countries going to be, right? And we
really
write
quickly,
down the names of the 3 countries, and we would discuss them.
Right? I wanted to, this is how he normally writes his prompts. So they're going to show up in a very similar style. They give you information and then ask the question. And mine are the same as well. I have a quote always, and then I do a slightly shorter bit of information because I've already given you the quote, and then I get to the prompt.
Here's another one. This academic year has been a year of social movements, including but not limited to Me Too, Time's Up, Black Lives Matter, No Ban, No Wall. Some of these started in 2017 or 2018. Some are decades old, but got new life this year. Pick 2 or 3 of the movements active this academic year and discuss them. Right? Pretty straightforward prompt. So let's look at this essay, right? Here's a sample essay drawn through it, right? And look at the beginning of it. The academic year of 2017-2018 has witnessed an impressive amount of movements based around society. Oops. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to go forward here because we're running out of time and I want to get to this point. So I'm just going to skip past that. And I'm going to get to this prompt. There we go. Let's just skip that one and get to this prompt. Is this the sample one that we used, Andy, or did I pick a different one?
I honestly can't remember. I have to see the next one.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll go to this one. The presentation will be up online, so you can see the whole presentation, right?
Yeah, so it has samples of my and the current events essays. Just
and lots
of
go back
later. Yeah.
But let's look at this one in specific. This year, 1992, might have been the first to get the label Year of the Woman after the election of a number of female senators and hotly contested Senate confirmation hearings for Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas, when EDO raised concerns about the dominance of men in the Senate. However, when historians look back, they'll unquestionably view the academic year 2019 as the Year of the Woman as well. Using substantial relevant information and varying national international perspectives, political, social, cultural, and economic, at least 3 specific examples, analyze the idea that 2018-2019 was another Year of the Woman. So there's the prompt, and here's a sample essay. We're going to give you the essay, and we're going to ask you then to score the essay based on the 0 to 10 score that we've given you. So here's the lead, here's the opening, here's the thesis. I'm certainly in favor of calling this the Year of the Woman, and it's about time. I mean, just look at what happened in Congress this year. 117 women were elected or appointed to Congress. 102 women were elected to the House. 15 women were elected or appointed to the Senate. 36 women are new members. And that's just at the national level. At the local level, 1/4 of state legislatures was female. Around the world, women led some 26 countries as heads of state, including Germany, Bangladesh, and Lithuania. Angela Angela Merkel, for example, has been described as the de facto leader of the European Union, the most powerful woman in the world, and as the leader of the free world. She announced in December she would not seek re-election as her party. This is the part where my thing covers that up. As her party, nor would she continue as chancellor. She was the country's first female chancellor. Of course, it was also a woman, Theresa May, who led the effort in the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. Not all women are success stories. Women also celebrated big successes in sports and science. Sarah Thomas was the first female official to work in NFL postseason history. It was only last summer when 2 Black women became the first time 2 women to officiate an NBA game together. The NBA got its first female referee in 1997. And last fall, the NBA promoted 5 referees to full-time status, including the 4th and 5th women in league history to achieve full-time status. NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Christina Koch were set to make history on March 29th as the first all-female crew to perform a spacewalk at the International Space Station. NASA said the spacewalk was delayed, quote, due in part to spacesuit availability. In the last 2 paragraphs here. Greta Thunberg, 16, my age, hasn't graduated high school, but she's a nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize. The Swedish activist is being consistently, I can't read that word, the honor and recognition of her work in the fight against climate change. They were smart enough to be nominated for a Nobel Prize. It was in 1920 when the 19th Amendment was finally ratified, guaranteeing all women the right to vote. But it was 100 years later when we celebrated the Year of the Woman. And here's the prompt again. And now David's going to bring up our poll, and we're going to ask you just based on remembering it. And I know you don't have it in front of you now. It's a little bit harder here in person, but we're just going to give you a poll. Now, remembering the rubric that we gave you, give that essay that I just read to you a score. And I know it's a little bit hard because we don't have the rubric in front of us and we don't have the essay in front of us. We give that essay a score. The nice part about this is you are independent and you're not able to talk to the other people. So that's kind of a neat little piece of this.
And that's one of the things we really like to focus on is staying independent. So what we advise is when you're actually in the room getting it done, excuse me, is that you write your score down for every single essay before you write anything on the grade sheet. So that means, sorry, I think your dog's calling you. So what you do is you make sure that you write every single score down as a judge, and everyone does that, and then you come together to compare your scores. You don't, okay, I read this one, I'm gonna write down a 7. I read this one, I'm gonna write down a 3 on the actual rubric score sheet. Don't do that. Don't write anything on there until you have read all of them, graded all of them, and so has everyone else. Then you do one at a time. I gave it a 7, I gave it a 6, I gave it a 5. Let's talk about it. Do we think a 6 is fair? No, I really think it should be higher, 6.5, whatever it is. And then you record that score so that each judge stays independent as long as possible.
So we got about half of you responding. And we'll give it another 10 or 15 seconds. Last call for respondents. All right, so David, if you can share the results there. Awesome. And we see exactly what we've seen over the years of doing this, that most of you give it a score in that 6 to 7 range. That's pretty much where this essay falls. I personally think that's a little bit high for that essay. But if we were in a room discussing with you, some of you would focus on that bullet point list at the beginning and how the rubric specifically says not to make it a bullet point list of things. And then some of you would say, well, yeah, but that was just used as a writing tool. Some of you would focus on the grammar, spelling, and punctuation errors that were a problem in there, and how all of that brought it down to that 6 to 7 level. Now, Andy, you want to talk about what would happen if we put them in groups?
Yeah, and so that would be the actual exercise of what we want to happen with our judging at district, region, state, is we want you to then discuss after you've reached your own independent conclusion before you get together to make that final score. And of course, writing comments down is always good. We like that. We know the students like it. We know you as coaches like it. So we definitely encourage that. And we encourage all three scores to appear. You know, don't just write down the consensus, write them all down so they know the range, because this magical number appears at the end without context. It's kind of unsatisfying. Even if it's a good number, you want to know how it got there. You want to know the highs and the lows of the three judges looking at it. So that's what we want you to do, and make sure you put all that down there so they can see that the discussion took place.
And inevitably the question will come up, do we have to use this piece of paper? No, you can write the scores on the essay. You can write comments on the essay. That's fine. You can, and you can write comments here if you want to, but we, Andy and I, really believe that it's important that the three judges not see each other's scores until the end of the process, right? Because the groupthink comes into play inevitably, and one judge will sway the other judges eventually anyway, right?
Yeah,
So,
and just by the order that you read the essays, your scores may be influenced, you know, and so we want to, that's going to happen naturally, can't help that. So we want to eliminate as much as we can as far as outside influence, because you just read that essay, you gave it whatever score you did. If you had read another essay before it, or you read another essay after it, you might change your opinion of that score, because now it's in context of, oh, that's much better than the next one I read, or wow, that's not near as good as this one.
right.
And so that's going to influence it, and that's fine. It should, because you're comparing things, but we don't want other judges' opinions to influence it as much as we can.
And really the question we want you to be able to ask is, so you gave it a 5. Why did you give it a 5? Can you help me understand why you gave it a 5? I gave it a 7. Let me explain why I gave it a 7. That's the discussion that we want to happen, right? And then eventually you're going to have to come up to a consensus, right? And that's okay. Oh, I did put the essay in there. So there's their whole essay, right? David, can you close that poll? I can't see anything on my screen right now. I don't know if it'll go away. You're going to have to read those things, Andy, because I can't. It's behind the poll.
So basically, you just want to keep it simple, like we talked about. You know, have those main points and cover them. Have the specs and cover those, but don't rant. No reason to go too much into your opinion and go off on tangents. Don't be silly. It doesn't work out. Everyone thinks they're hilarious, but not everyone else thinks you're hilarious. Unless you're, well, some people are just naturally funny, but it generally doesn't happen for you like you think it's going to in written form, and in fact can really turn some people off. So keep it simple, open with that clear thesis, because that's going to establish your base, and you can only get so high if it's not there. Organize things logically, and of course that outline is going to help you do that, and move forward logically by trying to not just connect what should be connected, but doing so with transitions. Use a conclusion. Introduction is very important. Conclusion just as important to tie together to make those ideas come full circle.
And so really, we start off with we end with the place that we started. The essay matters. We really believe that. We really believe it's an important part of the UIL competition, and certainly a part of our two competitions here. Absolutely, you can contact me. My dog's name is Coda. If you want to send him a threatening email and say, would you please keep quiet during presentations? Yeah, that's Coda. We've both launched Twitter accounts. And those of you that follow the current issues and events on Twitter, I tweet just about every day with a question, a current issues and events question, or a topic or something. And honestly, if you're looking at the essays, you can start to see patterns, because the things that get tweeted over and over and over again are increasingly likely to be essay topics. Andy?
And I definitely like to reach out as much as possible. I just, we were talking before we started the session, I concluded a poll. Took some of the feedback that we got in the chat from one of my earlier sessions, put it up there in a poll for possible topics for next year. And so that just closed yesterday, but I'll continue to do things like that. Plus clarifications always come out, and like interesting resources I find for study, I'll put out there. So definitely something to follow.
So thank you very much for coming, and I'll turn it back over to David.
We have one comment so far. If y'all have questions or anything you want to ask from Coda, be sure and put it in the
There's another comment.
section. Anyway, Nat writes, consider this, I think this is to the contest directors. If you want to reinforce specs, maybe specifications, with students, then consider listing those areas in that order in your prompts.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And that's a way to do it. Although at the same time, I don't want to write it for them, you know, so it is there in the original prompt, but yeah, that's a consideration.
And really, like Andy said, some prompts lend themselves, like a scientific prompt is going to lend itself to science much more so than some prompts. Some, you know, it's sometimes they weigh out too. One will be really important and one won't be really important.
Right.
Just depends.
That's it that we have for comments. A lot of thanks coming in, and a lot of great comments from everyone. Just for people in the group, if you've been following along in the chats about grading the essays at a practice meet, really helps you inside as a coach, and lots of other great stuff. So
absolutely, that's true, and certainly invitationals are the best practice for students as well, because they could competitive piece of it. Absolutely.
Yeah, because you can practice at school, you know, you can have them write one, but if it's not under those time guidelines and under the pressure of doing it, and plus just the effort of, hey, I want to win, so I'm going to put a little bit more into it. Don't give that as an excuse to not do it outside of those competitions, but it does really help to go to some of those or to use some of those.
great. Well, I don't see any other questions coming up, so we're going to go ahead and stop the recording for this session.
Thank you, David and Glenda.
Thank you so much.